ever thought about how convenient plastic items make our lives today? Have you ever thought about how much plastic pollution is in our oceans? My name is Aimee and I decided to do my final presentation on the topic of plastic pollution in our oceans because it is a worldwide problem that needs our attention. In my presentation, I will cover a few key aspects of the problem of plastic pollution in our oceans. Those will include basics of the issue, the scope of how widespread it has become, the harmful effects on marine wildlife, and efforts and ideas to prevent and reduce plastic pollution in our oceans. The largest source of oceanic plastic pollution is our increased dependency on plastic convenience items such as water bottles, single-use shopping bags, and other items of convenience. The issue of oceanic plastic pollution really came to light in 1997 when Sea Captain Charles Moore discovered one of the 5 enormous garbage patches in our oceans. It is shocking to learn that it is estimated that 46,000 pieces of plastic float in the ocean per square mile. To the right is a slide that gives an example of how a plastic item might find its way into the ocean and the path that it follows. Eventually, plastic does break down into smaller particles, which are hard to filter out of the water. However, it does take a very long time for marine debris to break down and decompose. This diagram gives us an idea of how long it takes for the plastic items we are discussing, as well as other items of marine debris, to decompose. This graph gives us an idea of how much plastic production has increased between 1950 and 2014. If you look at the diagram, it tells us that the plastic production has increased 20-fold over the last 50 or so years. Plastic pollution is widespread in our oceans. Oceanic currents trap pollution more heavily in some areas than others, also known as convergent zones, which are pushed by winds, tides, and currents. These areas of accumulation are known as gyres and occupy almost 40% of the ocean's surface worldwide. And if you think about that, that's really a staggering percentage. As the plastic pollution breaks down, there is a layer of soupy mix of the small particles which are degrading, and that is a layer that is persistent just below the surface of the water. Plastic pollution is not only sourced from items of plastic convenience, but also items in the fishing industry, such as floats, nets, lines, and tubes. This diagram breaks down the layers of the garbage patches. So you can see in the diagram to the right, there's the topical area of pollution, and below that is where the soupy mixture is that I mentioned of the plastic that's degrading. And below that are the currents that move this pollution into kind of a swirl where it just kind of continues to subside in these certain areas. There are many harmful effects on marine wildlife by plastic pollution in the oceans. Nearly 300 species of marine wildlife are affected by plastic debris in the oceans, ranging from sea turtles to monk seals to birds. Marine species get entangled in plastic pollution such as six-pack can rings, as you can see in the photo of the blue heron on the right side of the frame. Sea life species consume broken down pieces of plastic, which is potentially toxic to them. Some of the toxins in the plastics include PCBs and BPA. Some of these species are then consumed by humans, furthering the chain of toxic substance consumption. One hypothesis that is being tested is that more sea animals are killed by plastic pollution each year than effects of climate change. This slide shows a picture of some plastic pieces found floating in the ocean. And this is some of the plastic that I mentioned that the wildlife ingest, thinking that it's part of their natural food source. This diagram gives some eye-opening numbers and percentages of how plastic is affecting our oceans and wildlife. For example, 267 species around the world are harmed by plastic. It's kind of what I said about that number earlier, approximately 300. 86% of sea turtles, 44% of seabirds, and 43% of ocean mammals ingest or become tangled in plastic. This diagram kind of gives us a flow chart of how plastic pollution is discarded, eventually breaks down into smaller particles, and is consumed by wildlife, and how some of that wildlife, different species of fish, for example, eventually may end up on our dinner plate, thus furthering the consumption down the trophic level of plastic pollution and potential toxic substance within that. Although it does indeed appear to be a daunting task, there are ways that we can try to prevent and reduce oceanic plastic pollution. Probably the number one thing is just educating the general public on this problem and encouraging a shift in consciousness from being so dependent on these plastic convenience items. For example, banning the single-use plastic items such as the shopping bags in the diagram below. Another way to prevent and reduce pollution is to encourage recycling and make plastic items more easily recyclable. The diagram on this slide shows kind of from the left to the right items that are easily recyclable, somewhat recyclable as far as ease goes, and to the right, items that are currently most difficult to recycle. Another big aspect of preventing and reducing plastic pollution is looking at the global scale improvement that's needed for plastic waste mismanagement. This diagram shows us the biggest areas of plastic waste mismanagement, and it's important to kind of note where they are so that maybe we can work with these different areas of the world for policies toward reducing the plastic waste mismanagement. One last thought on prevention and reduction of plastic pollution in our oceans is really to start from the root of the problem. And again, really taking a hard look at our convenience dependency of plastic products, and also taking a look at the future projections of how much we're going to produce if we kind of keep at this pace of our dependency. So in this diagram, for example, it shows in 2014 of plastics production, there were 311 metric tons. And if we keep going at this rate, by 2050, it's estimated that there will be 1,124 metric tons, which is almost 4 times as much, which is just a huge increase. Finally, I'm going to leave you with a slide that just kind of gives you an overall view of plastic pollution and the effects on our oceans. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope it'll give you some thought about how we can all work together to reduce some of the plastic pollution in our oceans.